All right, hi, thank you for inviting me. This is awesome. This meeting is in an amazing building, so I'm really excited. So I'm here as in my role of Science Collaborations Coordinator. I met a lot of you over the past year and a half since I began serving in this role. I'm also the Transients and Variable Stars co-chair. The Transients and Variable Stars is one of the largest science collaborations of LSST, and so I know a lot of you in that capacity as well. Also, I'm Italian, so we have a connection. So I'm going to go over just some very basic things about the LSST structure and the role of the science collaborations. And I also have some slides that are a little bit redundant with what Colin said about the call, what's the scope of the call, and how to write the papers. And then I'll go over just very briefly basically a laundry list of papers that have been proposed and thought of for you to know so that you can make connections with the people that are writing them. And then I also will be speaking tomorrow, and I'm charged to speak about the proposal submission process. That's a fairly general topic. So if you want to approach me and ask me specific questions for me to include the answers in tomorrow's talk, I'm very happy to do that. So the science collaborations are essentially bodies of volunteers that have been serving for the LSST project, sort of for the project in the sense of for the greater good of the LSST idea in the past maybe about 10 years. There's currently 8 science collaborations and over 2,000 members across the world. We recently acquired within the science collaboration a large number of people from outside the United States. This is because participation to the science collaborations requires access to the data rights. So the American community has access to the LSST data just in virtue of the fact that they're affiliated with an American institute, because LSST is funded by NSF. So does the Chilean community, whereas the other countries had to purchase rights, just like Italy did. And so we recently have seen a number of people from all over the world joining the collaboration. This slide is a little bit out of date. There's now new members both in Asia and the Pacific that are joining the science collaborations after having acquired rights. There's 8 science collaborations. They're divided just sort of broadly by scientific interest and expertise. I'm highlighting the Transients and Variable Stars collaboration because it's the one that I'm co-chairing. I also want to point out that there is an informatic and statistics science collaboration, which works a little bit differently than the other ones in the sense that it doesn't cover a specific astrophysical scope. So the people that are joining that science collaboration really are at the service of the people in the other science collaboration as experts of tools and methods. I like to show these slides that are core diagrams of the science collaborations, and I'll show you one for TVS. Each arc represents the respective size of the science collaboration, and the chords that go from one arc to the other represent share membership, so members that are members of more than one collaboration. This actually is a constraint that was lifted recently by LSST Corporation. It used to be that you had to choose one and only one science collaboration, but now you can join more than one, and this is great in my opinion because it allows for synergy and shared expertise and sharing of expertise and generally creativity and collaboration. The largest science collaborations are TVS and DESC. DESC looks a little bit small here because it has a 2-tier membership. It's the blue one on the top left. It really is the largest science collaboration by a lot. Altogether, it has over 700 members, but only about just short of 100 are full members. So that's what's represented here. This is the Transients and Variable Stars collaboration, just to show that it has internally also a subdivided structure into many subgroups, but the structure of each science collaboration is unique to the science collaboration. Its science collaborations are self-governed and self-managed, and they decide their own managerial and governmental structure. Let's see. The science collaborations have been crucial throughout the life of LSST to guide the project towards scientifically wise decisions. They were in fact funded by the project, or encouraged to be funded by the project, for the purpose of writing the LSST science book, which was published in 2009, and which was sort of the first publication that where the overarching goals and ideas about LSST were shared with the world, and that led to LSST becoming a priority in the US community, scientific community. More recently, the science collaborations have collaborated into the creation of this live document. So this is not technically a paper in the sense that it's not a peer-reviewed paper, but it's a live document that exists on GitHub. Live document means it can be updated and continue to be updated as LSST, before the start of LSST and possibly even after the start of LSST, where scientists have gotten together to describe scientific cases that would be of interest to a telescope like LSST and how LSST can approach them. So it's a science-driven optimization of the LSST observing strategy, and this relates closely to the topic of the white papers we're here to discuss today. I added this slide after the last talk, so this is generally, we are reviewing and revising the content of the lsst.org website. And I'm leading a working group in doing that. And we had very many discussions about who actually makes the decision and what is the very complex structure of LSST, because even the people that are quite close to LSST may have some doubts about that. But this is what we came up with. And I just wanted to point out that if you are here, you have the ability to influence LSST in two capacities, because you are an LSST member, so through the LSST Corporation, you're a member institute, and you directly vote into the executive board to directly make suggestions to the project through the LSST Corporation. And then on the other hand, you're also a member of a science collaboration, and so you have direct access to communication with the project, and you have the ability to influence the project on decision on matters based on scientific arguments. So LSST was really designed as a telescope for the people, so the LSST strategy, the concept, the idea, and how it will be developed really rests in the hand of the scientific community and in your hands in these two roles. So, continuing on the trend of the LSST science book and then the LSST science-driven optimization of the LSST Cadence live paper, LSST has issued a call for white papers to propose LSST cadences. Now, of course, the LSST cadence as a general idea exists, but the details of it are crucial to understand what science LSST will perform on, and so this is what these papers are about. The call asks the community, not only the science collaborations, but the entire scientific community, including people that don't hold data rights, and this is important because it makes the process maybe very competitive, even more than if it was just within the science collaborations, to submit white papers to define the details of the cadences, including the drilling field and target of opportunity. These are mentioned specifically. This is an extract from the webpage of the white paper proposal call. These are mentioned specifically, but really this call covers all of the science, all of the LSST cadences. And I'll tell you what I mean by that in a second. There is a full document that describes in very much detail this white paper proposal call. It is a whopping 37 pages, but I do recommend you read them if you intend to propose a paper. There are very many details that are relevant and important to know if you want to propose. Of course, most of the science collaborations had discussions about what the science papers should contain and how they should be presented, and I will iterate on that tomorrow, but also it might be a good idea to read through this document. So generally, when we talk about the LSST cadence, if people that are not very familiar with LSST think of this is the wide, fast, deep. So the overall sky survey that will cover all of the southern hemisphere sky to a magnitude depth of 27 or so, 24 or so, and then a few fields to higher depth, and we'll revisit the fields sort of as a back of the envelope calculation maybe every 3 days. However, this is just one of the LSST strategies. The full LSST 10-year survey will have the wide fast deep, which, because of science requirements, which I'll mention in a second, will probably take something between 80 and 90% of the sky time, as well as mini surveys. Here in this particular simulation, you see the North Ecliptic Survey, the Galactic Plane, and the South Celestial Pole. So those are areas that are not covered by this implementation of the wide fast deep, but are covered in a more shallow fashion by mini surveys. And then you see the blue dots. Those are the deep drilling fields. And there's 5 deep drilling fields in this particular simulation. All of the details of this are to be discussed. The fact that this particular map, which is one of the most, the ones that we show most commonly, it was the baseline in the previous iteration of simulations. It's now a little bit superseded. It's now superseded by slightly more sophisticated maps and simulations, but generally they look to the eye not very different from this. But even the fact that these areas are covered, this is not guaranteed. This doesn't have to happen. And if there is a strong push from the community to do a very different survey, this can happen. And the push of the community happens through these papers. There's a couple of things that will happen for sure that are basically written in stone for the LSST cadence. You can read this document, the LSST Science Requirements document, and this is the closest that you get to understand what of LSST is written in stone. Pretty much if it ended up on this paper, it's probably not going to change. And in this paper are defined the 4 science goals of LSST, which interestingly were actually created not so much from a science-driven perspective, but because the original inception of LSST was designed to be a very challenging project. And people at the time thought that putting together these 4 science pillars would make a very compelling project and a very challenging one that would advance telescope design and technical design. So these are the 4 science goals: constraining dark energy and dark matter, taking an inventory of the solar system, exploring the transient optical sky, and mapping the Milky Way. This is not going to change. Other things that are not going to change, that are consequences of the fact that those are the 4 science pillars, are generally the depth and the breadth of the survey, so the sky area of the survey, do have constraints. About 18,000 square degrees will have to be covered to implement those 4, to successfully approach those 4 science goals. And the filter set is fixed, U, G, I, Z, and Y, and this is also fixed because the filters have been built, and they're very expensive, very large filters. Any implementation that has been simulated that fulfills these requirements takes about 80 to 90% of the telescope time. There are requirements on parallax and proper motions that are pretty much written in stone, and those give weak constraints on how the visitors are distributed throughout the lifetime of the survey and throughout a season. So there are some constraints and limitations to how you can design the survey. For example, there's a lot of talk about a rolling cadence, where the focus of the survey is in a particular area of the sky earlier during the survey, so you're sort of front-loading a particular area of the sky and then covering it less and less progressively until you stop covering it in the later years of the survey. There are limits to how aggressive that rolling cadence can be because there are limits to parallax and proper motion imposed by the parallax and proper motion requirements. There's one final technical constraint, which is a rapid revisit that must be acquired in an area of at least 2,000 square degrees. This is actually implemented trivially by running cadences that basically overlap the field at short periods of time. So a cadence that goes along the meridian and then runs down the meridian will implement it. Other than these 3 requirements, things are very flexible. You already have seen the timeline for the white paper proposal submission. Submission deadline is November 30th, and then the SAC will decide on the papers. And it shall be pointed out that this is not a formal acceptance or rejection process. This is not a proposal call, it's a white paper call, because basically what the SAC will do is propose a ranking of the white papers, such that the highest ranked white papers proposals will be simulated for sure, and then progressively, depending on time and technical resources, you stand a lesser and lesser chance of having your simulation implemented. And then the simulations will be compared, will be available by the end of 2019, and then they will be compared. And I will mention how in a second. Finally, the decision will be made, of course, around 2021. So at that point, we will have a starting strategy that will be the initial strategy of LSST, because LSST will start only a short year after that. So you can propose for any of the surveys, any of the surveys components, the wide, fast, deep, deep drilling fields, mini surveys. Specifically for the mini survey, there are explicit requests to propose for a galactic plane survey, motivate the galactic plane surveys. There are simulations that include the galactic plane, and there are simulations that simply don't include the galactic plane. So the project is eager to hear scientific merit of both. The northern ecliptic spur, same thing. The candidate South celestial pole, sorry, there is one bullet too many and a little bit of mess in this slide. But also ideas for new mini-surveys are welcome. And mini-survey that is being proposed, for example, is the Magellanic Clouds mini-survey that I know several of you may be interested in. And what does it mean to propose a survey? So all of the things that we were saying earlier. So when you propose a survey, you can suggest what is the cadence of the survey, so what is the time interval between visits, what are the filters how the filters get exchanged in the survey, what is the filter set even that is implemented in the survey, with constraints, again, on the wide, fast, deep. The wide, fast, deep will have all 5 filters to some depth, but it doesn't perhaps have to have all 5 filters to the depths that have been simulated until now. But you can envision a mini survey that will go on a single filter. It's unlikely to be very compelling because it will be very specific perhaps to a particular science case. Transients generally are, well, maybe not. Let me just rephrase that. The less specific a proposal is, the more science cases it can accomplish, the more compelling it is. So keep that in mind as you design the concept of your survey. So the optimal visit exposure time is also under discussion. Generally, all surveys until now have been simulated with 2 30-second snap exposures that form a visit. The exposure time of 30 seconds, there are constraints to that because of the total depth that the survey has to achieve in order to accomplish the 4 goals. But it doesn't have to be taken in 2 15 seconds snaps. And obviously there is tension here because avoiding the 2 snaps significantly contributes to the efficiency. It can give you up to, Colin, I may be wrong, but I think maybe 10% of the survey back. I think that's what Robert Lupton was saying. But of course it affects saturation time. So there are pros and cons, and this is being explored by a number of proposals. Yeah. And then just so that you have a more clear goal, what will be the evaluation criteria for the papers that you may submit, the science importance and legacy value of your survey design, which includes whether it is very specific for a narrow scope or it is a survey that addresses more scientific topics, and also whether it matches the unique abilities of LSST and how well it implements the 4 science goals of LSST. its feasibility, whether or not it butts against or puts tension on the telescope and the technical requirements of the survey, and the amount of time that is requested. Of course, a survey that is more efficient should be prioritized so that more surveys can be implemented. This specifically refers to each piece of the survey being efficient. So a mini survey being efficient, a deep drilling field being efficient, so requiring less sky time compared to something that's accomplished similar goals. Now, there's a lot of white papers in the planning by a number of stakeholders. I really only have information about what's going on within the science collaborations, and I think there may be papers that are going to be proposed from outside the science collaboration, but it's very hard to keep track of them. So I'm not aware of any, and neither is anybody that I know within LSST, so the SAC or anybody like that. We are trying to coordinate the submission of the white papers in this sense. First of all, white papers are tricky because they have a limited reward for the person that writes them, and everybody wants to get tenure. So people that submit the white papers are encouraged to also submit this as peer review publications if they find a journal that is happy to accept them. And so in that sense, there may be some reluctance in sharing information early because you may wonder whether that decreases the competitiveness of your proposal for publication. From the point of view of LSST, however, it is really important that synergies are disclosed and understood, and so that tension will be disclosed and understood as well. So the Science Advisory Committee, the SAC, specifically asked me to try to coordinate and disclose as much as possible what papers are being submitted and what sort of generally they will be about. One effort towards this was initiated by Knut Olsen, who is in the Stars Milky Way and Local Volume Science Collaboration. And so, do you want to click on that link, please? No, the link on the slide. You may need to get out and back in. Yeah. Perfect. So this page is on community. Community is a portal where the LSST community talks. It's kind of like a Stack Overflow inspired type of forum. And people have listed papers that they're working towards here. And if you scroll up a bit, there's something like 25 papers listed on this page alone, and this is not a really complete set of the papers that are being submitted. So if you're thinking of submitting something and you haven't posted it on this page, I do encourage you to post it on this page. And if you're thinking of submitting something and you haven't looked at this page, I do encourage you to look at this page and look for papers that may be similar in the scope or technically similar. So papers that may submit a cadence that tries to achieve a similar goal, as well as papers that may have a different goal, but may go towards a similar technical cadence. Those things are really important to be disclosed and to be understood. Back to the slides. Mm-hmm. Let me give you just a few summary points on the papers that are being submitted. Yes, please. Next, please. Oh, okay. So by science collaboration, so first of all, by kind of proposal, there's about 8 deep drilling fields proposals that are listed on that page. This is mostly based on that community forum page. There are 11 wide, fast, deep surveys that are being proposed, 10 mini surveys. There's also a couple of twilight surveys and a couple of targets of opportunity. I'll get back to that in a second. By science collaboration, I don't know why I have desk twice there, but you can see that the Transients and Variable Stars is submitting a whopping 15 papers. Most of the other science collaborations are submitting fewer. There's a reason for that, which is that Transients and Variable Stars is a very broad topic that addresses very different phenomena that have very different technical requirements. So within my science collaboration, we have decided not to submit a single paper or a few papers that cover all of the TVS goals, because I don't know how to do that. So I couldn't ask my TVS people to do that. We are just trying to understand the synergy within the papers and submitting them as single submissions. Something like DESC has a very clear goal, better measurements on H0, and so it's easier for them to submit a single publication. So they're working towards basically a single paper which will cover both wide, fast, deep drilling fields and maybe mini surveys as well. Exactly. So this is a bit of a trick to look at it like this, because the desk paper covers both mini survey, deep drilling fields, twilights, and TO. So if we show this as individual surveys, next slide, then this is how it looks. The TVS still submits the highest number of papers, but the other collaborations begin to catch up. Next slide.
Is it working?
Yeah, it's fine. These slides, this link on the right here is the link to this slide. So there's now going to be a whole lot of slides that I'm just going to run through, and that I encourage you to look at for yourself. They're basically summaries of the things that are being proposed. The link persists throughout the slides, so you can go there at any point. AGN is submitting both for wide, fast, deep drilling fields and twilights. In fact, a number of science collaborations are submitting for twilights. Most science collaborations are submitting for deep drilling fields, and as Colin mentioned, this means submitting pointings and submitting technical approach to doing a deep drilling field survey. 4 pointings have been selected already, and then the question that people always ask is how many deep drilling fields will there be? And that cannot be answered because we don't know what the wide, fast, deep survey is, so we don't know how efficient it is. Basically, any time that is left behind from the wide, fast, deep survey can be used for mini survey and deep drilling fields and TO, and those will be in competition with each other to fill in the 20 to 10% of the remaining time. So the number of deep drilling fields depend on the efficiency of all of the other components of the survey and the competitiveness of the proposals. Let me also point out that I have missing science collaborations here, so I expect this list not to be complete, because I do expect galaxies for sure to submit papers. They just haven't listed them and haven't communicated to me what they will be. Next. To give you a sense of what people are submitting for, TVS is, again, writing the most papers, so it's dominating on all of these, but mostly there is going to be the size of these donut plots are proportional to the number of proposals that will be submitted. So most submissions will be for wide, fast, deep surveys, but there will be a large number of mini surveys that are proposed. A couple of these are redundant. There's a couple of different galactic plane surveys and maybe a couple of different north ecliptic spur surveys, but these are considered as independent proposals. And there's 4 twilight surveys, which is, I think, rather interesting. And I was trying to grab from what people had written on community, I was trying to grab a sense of what people were proposing for. So word clouds are really bad though, so it didn't really tell me anything. So next, I actually parsed the most common words by hand. So this is perhaps not really objective. These are keywords as I define them. But basically, most people are concerned with addressing the variability when they write these papers. This may have to do with the fact that TVS is submitting the most papers. There's a lot of papers that are interested with science, doing science with stars and supernovae. There's a number of papers that will mention the galactic plane. Let me scroll down a bit to interesting things. Synergy, these are papers that mention that their survey design covers more than one scientific topic. I'll mention some more about that in a second. And gravitational waves are actually very interesting because the idea that LSST could do gravitational wave follow-up is recent, but it gained a lot of ground. And so targets of opportunity are being proposed for this, and they are, in my opinion, well, they're going to be considered seriously. In my opinion, there is a very good chance that LSST will enable that. Next. We can actually skip a few slides. You can see, if you're interested in any of these gravitational waves or supernovae or whatever, you can go back to this slide and see what collaborations are proposing for that and communicate to the collaborations if you don't want to bother communicating with the single author papers and telling them that you're thinking of also submitting a North Ecliptic Spur survey or whatever else. But the last one is interesting, which is synergy. Again, the first criteria for the selection of the paper is the legacy value and the synergy. So we organized a workshop in New York. We had actually a number of people from ENAF coming to New York. Next slide. Next slide, yeah. Coming to New York for this workshop, which was organized at the Flatiron Institute with funds from the Hayes and Simons Foundation. And the participation was from really all of the science collaborations, although Stronglands didn't show up in the end. Next. And out of these, I do strongly recommend that even if you just give a cursory look at the community page, you do look at these slides. This is the output of that workshop. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 11 papers, I will qualify that in a second, have been worked on during the workshop. We had experts from LSST that provide their expertise in creating opsims for these concepts. And we actually, through the Hayes&Simons Foundation, had a competitive process so that an honorarium will be awarded to a subset of these papers, of the authors of a subset of these proposals, to complete the paper, signing on, actually submitting that as a paper for the white paper proposal call. Can you go to the page on the link at the bottom? So you can see the slideshow for each one of these. Each one is only 4 slides, so it really won't take very long. No, that's the wrong link, sorry. I sent you in the wrong place. I was the one at the top. So these were the presentations, the one at the top in the title. Oh, yeah, yes, sorry. Thank you, my bad. These are the 4 slides that were presented in the competitive process of acquiring the honorarium. So each one of these is a set of 1 title and 4 science slides that I strongly encourage you to review. And these papers cover all sorts of topics, from deep drilling fields to synergistic approaches to the wide fast deep that can solve many science cases, to rolling cadence. A number of them talked about the galactic plane, the wide fast deep. They talked about synergy with other surveys, particularly WFIRST. These papers are definitely going to be submitted, so this is definitely going to be either your competition or your collaborators, or perhaps somebody that can strengthen your case in a parallel paper that is synergistic with this. Back to the slides. I am basically done, short of showing you that I have a bunch of slides here, which I will definitely not go through for all the papers that have been talked about. This includes the papers on community and a few more that each science collaboration chair shared with me for the Flatiron Institute meeting, and 1 slide per paper so you can see what is being proposed in a very general sense and make connections. If you are in TVS, I want to remind you that we have an internal deadline, which is the first week of November, so that we can read the papers internally and make these connections that the Science Advisory Committee has specifically asked us to make. So if you're in TVS, you should have a draft for us by the first week of November so we can read it and see if, again, papers have present the same strategy, or papers are trying to recover the same science goal, or maybe papers have diametrically opposite strategies that are really non-compatible. Tomorrow, I will definitely point out what are the diagnostics that you should have in those papers. It's a very important topic. So, but generally speaking, you should have a metric and a figure of merit, basically something that can be computed against a particular simulation strategy, a particular opsim realization, into a single number, and that number becomes a figure of metric for your science. It's very important that your cadence design is accompanied by this, because then your scientific concept can be also investigated for other opsims and other cadence proposals. And so together with the figure of merit and those requirements on the opsim, there should be a tolerance that says, I need observations in R-band every 30 minutes, plus or minus 10, so that really other opsims that are not identical to yours but are of value for your science case can also be vetted against your science case. I think I can stop here for this.
Sorry, once again, a couple of practical issues. Whenever you are saying galactic plane, what do you mean? Because in the 36 pages there is a northern limit, but there is no southern limit. And since one of the 5 goals of LSST is the mapping of the Milky Way,
Right.
the 40% of the mass is in the galactic bulge, like it or not, is reality.
Yes. So there will have to be some avoidance of the most crowded fields, because I don't think there is any expectation that the LSST pipeline, the default pipeline, could be robust to the most crowded, to the bulge in the most crowded fields. So as far as the wide, fast, deep goes, the plan in general is to cover, either not cover what I mean by that is that most wide, fast, deeps that have been proposed generally avoid the galactic plane or cover the galactic plane in only a subset of the filters to a shallower depth. Again, it's all about making a compelling science case that shows that that's a bad idea, and then you can divert as much of the time as possible towards the galactic plane. There's compelling reasons for doing that. For example, synergy with W-first. There's a whole paper that I was mentioning is co-observing with W-first, and that will be in the bulge or in the galactic plane because for the microlensing co-observations. So there's a number of science cases that will benefit from galactic plane science, of course. But there's a problem with crowdedness going as deep as LSST will go. All I'm saying is pretty obvious, I guess.
Yeah, this is the point, in the sense that the very same sentence comes from Gaia. Gaia cannot do that.
Right.
Okay? So if LSST is going to miss this, at least for the low reddening regions, I am not saying to have the entire survey, but for sure there is a significant portion of the galaxy that is there. Doesn't matter whether we are going with the 3 bands instead of 6 bands, but this is, well, obviously we are going to write this. Even if there is no synergy with W-first or whatever, is the fact that the current surveys are going to miss these regions. That is quite compelling for understanding the galaxy.
That's a perfectly fair point, and I have nothing personally against the galactic plane, so I recommend that you make that point clearly in a paper, and that you recall, as you make that point, that the Milky Way is one of the 4 science pillars, and you just quantify how much of the Milky Way would be lost by avoiding the galactic plane. I think that's a very compelling argument. You know, again, to be measured against many other compelling arguments for doing other things. But thankfully, I don't make decisions, so that's good for me.
I just have a curiosity about the fact that in the galactic plane, individual fields will be observed with a single exposure, not collected in pairs, because with smaller exposure times, in principle, could improve the detection of the sources.
Yes, I think, sorry for pushing through all these slides, but I think, I messed it up. One of these papers basically says exactly that. I can't remember which, but there is a wide, fast, deep proposal somewhere here that basically covers the galactic plane with avoiding U-band and Y-band or whatever, and possibly to a shallower depth. And the shallower depth actually is, you know, if there is nothing that, a couple of things there. The integration time has been simulated as 15 seconds. As I mentioned, it doesn't have to be 15 seconds. If the exposure time changes for a particular region of the sky, I would think that that would fall into a mini survey rather than the wide, fast, deep. I think that's probably true. So if you intend to change the SNAP's duration, the exposure time, between the rest of the sky and the galactic plane, that will probably make the galactic plane a mini survey. But those are all technicalities. It's very plausible to propose that.
I think that this is unavoidable, and there is a reason. It's not only a matter of crowding, once you are exposing for 15 seconds in the galactic bulge, you are going to have a bunch of bright stars that are going to deteriorate the quality of the images because you are going to have spikes everywhere.
Sure.
So in this case, it is better to have 10 seconds instead of 15. But it's something that can be simulated. It's not a problem.
Oh yeah, there's, you know.
But the cadence, well, in this case, the snaps cannot be the same of the galactic halo because in that case, even if you have bright stars, it is not going to be a problem, or saturated stars.
Sure.
Yeah.
I just want to make one technical follow-on point to that, which is that our requirements in terms of processing the crowded fields. We are committed to doing image differencing over all areas of the sky. So if you are satisfied with light curves from image differencing in the whatever crowded region you want, we say that we will do that, and we are working on making sure that that testing happens. In terms of measuring direct imaging sources, that is formally phrased as a best effort. So we are committed to delivering the 18,000 square degrees in the main survey at reasonable performance in terms of handling blended and crowdedness. But in the galactic plane, that gets you into the galactic plane, but there are just some regions that are going to just be very, very hard. And so those we are sort of not held to the requirements in those extremely dense regions. On the other hand, it's not a huge amount of area that if one was just interested in processing coads, it sounds like a very reasonable process, very reasonable thing for people to do their own processing on also. It's just outside of our formal scope.
Right, so actually this brings a point that I was going to make tomorrow, but I might as well bring it up now. If the survey that you're proposing cannot be analyzed with the default LSST pipeline, it is explicitly spelled out that LSST will not provide single-purpose pipelines, and that if you submit for a pipeline that cannot leverage the LSST default pipeline, processing pipeline, you have to specify that you're aware of that, and that you have plans, and ideally you have plans to write the pipeline and possibly the computational load that that pipeline would imply.
This looks like as a circular argument. How I can say whether the aperture photometry in the galactic bulge is going to work if I do not have preliminary results concerning the simulations in these kind of fields.
But there are simulation tools that are fairly well documented, and we'll have a couple of talks on those tomorrow. So it is possible to simulate the LSST sky, and LSST has provided tools to do that.
Yeah.
They may be.
But indeed, we are doing
mile.
by ourselves this kind of job. We are already simulating using the DECAM data. The difference between aperture photometry and PSF photometry in these fields. And we have numbers demonstrating that we can do that.
Yes,
so not just, I will say, just gossips. We know how to do that, but we need the images.
What I'm saying is that you actually can simulate the images. There is software to
we are using real images collected with DECAM. I can tell you what happens with the DECAM images once you perform aperture photometry and PSF photometry.
So I'm aware of that, and I thought the next step in that project, if we're talking about the crowded field photometry work that I know of, that the next step would be to simulate LSST images with the LSST software that has been provided to simulate LSST images, which obviously is not, I'm saying it as if it was like, sure, let me press a button and go off and do that. Obviously it has computational requirements and it's not trivial, but software to do that exists. Task has been very fruitful in producing LSST images with the simulation software. They're very interested in the crowded field photometry pipeline and the performance of the pipeline of Scarlet in general, which is the software. Generally, they do extragalactic science, so they're not, as a default, producing any really crowded galactic plane fields. But at the discussion of the community workshop in August, they were open to, taking requests and seeing if we can provide a support structure that leverages the knowledge and even computational resources of DESC to provide images for the rest of the community.